Hello everyone, welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Kira, and today I thought I would go over all of the books that made me into the reader I am today. So if you don't know, I did post a video earlier this year when it came to my gentle goals for the year, and I'm trying to pivot into slow living a little bit more. So I've been really trying to focus on doing things with my children that will give them good memories, and I tend to always go to these things like feelings of nostalgia. And part of that's always associated with me for reading, because I was always a pretty big reader, but there were some books that I just remember being very pivotal in my reading journey. Just made me love certain genres, or just really want to devour more books that are similar to that, or just books in general. I also spoke about in my March TBR that March is middle grade March. I put a link in that video. I'll try to link it in this one, but it's just prompting and just kind of embracing new middle grade authors. And I really love middle grade. They've become very cozy for me, and I've been enjoying finding new favorites. I think I read the Percy Jackson series when I was in college, and I absolutely love them. I think they're great, and I have all of them. I'm really hoping that my children will love reading as much as I do, so I'm trying to do things that hopefully encourage that for them. They will either really love reading or they won't, but I really want to try and get them to love reading as much as I do, just because you all are readers. You know what it does, and you know like how it helps you get into new worlds and learn new things and just relax. So I thought in this video that I would go over the books that were really pivotal in my reading journey. I won't be talking about the really young books, the ones my children are currently on now, but I want to talk more about middle grade and some of the ones that I read in college that really turned my reading journey a little bit. And some of these would be in my favorite books, but a lot of them I just didn't mention just because they were younger. So I don't know if people will be interested in this video, but I just thought I would share because I think it's a fun month to do it. So the first two books that I'm going to talk about are from the same author, and one of them is pretty young. I feel like I will be reading these to my children soon, and my children, one of them is about to go into kindergarten, but they were just really impactful for me, and they still are. I regularly read them, so when I saw them I had to pick them up. The first being The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein, and the second being Where the Sidewalk Ends. I read this one so much when I was younger. My mom used to read it to me all the time, I remember, and my dad. But I just love the short story aspect of it. I'm not a poetry person whatsoever, but I just loved the little snippets of stories. And I just remember so many of them. Hector the Collector, The Boa Constrictor. I just think how whimsical they are. They do teach you a lot, and this definitely sparked me wanting to go to the library to find more fantasy stories. And The Giving Tree, I think most people know The Giving Tree. I think this one is very applicable for when you get older. As a mom, this one now makes me kind of cry a little bit just because of what it symbolizes, but I just think it's an absolutely amazing story if you've never read it. But just growing up and changing, and how things progress, and love, and what it takes to be compassionate and sacrifice. I just think this was a very impactful story, but I think those books have to be mentioned, even though they're not my main books that I want to talk about. I just could not talk about them in this video just because of how wonderful they are. But the next book that I read, I remember being in my library back in the corner, but it's The Hardy Boys. I read all of these. I know it's odd because most girls read Nancy Drew, but The Hardy Boys for sure were what got me into reading more mysteries and thrillers and really liking them. I loved all of these. I've been trying to collect them as I find them, but I think The Hardy Boys are just classic, and they're not disturbing for when you have younger kids. But I kind of want to do a video where I go back and reread The Hardy Boys. I know Gavin from Gavin Reads It All, he does a lot of middle grade reading, and he's been collecting the Goosebumps and going back and reading some of them. I really loved these stories. I love their brotherly relationship, but they're always kind of spooky and fun. I just remember just inhaling them, and they were more of a challenge for me to read when I started reading them. So it was a good first chapter books. This was a lot of my first chapter books I remember reading, and it just sparked me going into my next ones, which are the Goosebump books. I know a lot of people read Goosebumps books. I didn't start reading horror till probably last year, but I did read Goosebumps when I was younger. There's just too many to count. I'll probably put some of my favorites up here, but I read the Goosebumps books, I watched the shows, and I think it really got me into watching a lot of horror movies when I was younger. My mom is a huge like spooky crime show lover, so this was definitely something that, you know, kind of spurred that in me. But I just loved how they kind of had, you know, themes and stories, and they would teach you things, but they just really kind of changed my trajectory of reading, and I feel like they did really challenge me. Even though, like, going back and reading them, they're very simple to read, but, you know, when you're young, this was like a big accomplishment for me. I have probably like, I don't know, 6 or 7 of these ones, and there's a lot of them, so I just kind of need to collect them as I see them. The Goosebumps, I don't. Those are very collectible now, so I don't know if I'd buy like a new set eventually, but yeah, they're extremely collectible, and so they cost a lot for some of them. So the next books that I feel like I read, I'm kind of trying to look at my list and go a little bit by age and kind of how I progressed through them. But the next books I feel like I read a lot of, which I have an entire set because I bought them, are Roald Dahl books. And the main ones that I read, Matilda. I didn't know it was a book, and then I think my parents mentioned that the movie was a book, and I eventually read that. But I also read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I read all of them. This is actually part of a bit of a series. I don't know if a lot of people knew that. And then I also read The Witches, which again helped me with like my kind of my spookier, you know, stories. And I loved the historical aspect of this, and it kind of made me go into those eyewitness books a lot. I was still pretty young, but I just love Roald Dahl's writing. Again, it's somewhat like Shel Silverstein in the fact that it's really whimsical, but it's very accessible for younger kids, and you learn a lot from them. Matilda, I loved the movies. I think most people my age grew up on that movie, and so reading the book was definitely a different experience. I feel like this one was the first like book versus movie comparison I did, but I still think that it was just like Miss Trunchbull. And I loved Matilda and, you know, Miss Honey. It's just a wonderful book. If you've never read the book but you loved the movie, you really should. It's not hard, but I think that's, again, I think middle grade and some of these younger books people would still really enjoy even at our age. It's just fun and cozy, and you can pick up on more themes than you did when you were younger for sure. And Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is different. It's definitely different from the movie, the original movie. I still love the movie. It's a classic for a reason, but at the ending, and then if you read the books afterwards, it's very different. You don't really expect it. So he just does a lot of different things in these books. I feel like the books are a little bit, I wouldn't say darker. The movie definitely plays it up a little bit more whimsical and light than in the books do. And I'm talking about the like original movie, but I still really loved it, and I definitely did continue the series. So if you've never read it, it's definitely interesting, and I think that people would like it. And then The Witches, I think that it was really great. The descriptions of the witches when they take off their disguises, it's actually very well done in the movie that they're in. I think Angelica Houston is the main witch in that. And I have not read this one in a while. I think I've read the other two a little bit more recently. Not that recently, but I kind of want to reread this one. I've been thinking about doing a video where I reread some of these. Like as a mom now, I think a lot of times when I read things or I watch, you know, videos or shows, I get a lot. Like my husband and I are very nostalgic, and so we've been putting on some of the movies that we really loved as a kid. And so watching it back, especially like Disney and everything, there's just like a lot of jokes in there that just went way over my head when I was younger, and it's a different experience when you watch it now. So I might go back and reread some of these just to see, you know, how I take it now. But those 3 books were huge in my reading journey, in my opinion. I went through all of his books, but those were definitely my favorite ones, which leads me into my next ones. From reading those, and when I turned into Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I remember my librarian there, who was just like this really sweet lady, told me that I would love The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. I don't have them because I've been looking for some nicer hardcover versions. I just want to collect them in hardcover. But I really loved, especially The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If you never read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's about the Pevensey siblings, but they're living in Britain and there's bombing happening. It takes place during World War II. And they're sent to live with family in the countryside, and that family has this wardrobe, and they end up hiding in it during a game, and they figure out that there's a doorway into Narnia through it. And it was just literally the doorway into a magical world that you could just be playing something so simple as hide and seek, and then you could end up on this grand adventure. Was so eye-opening for me. And that book right there really got me into fantasy reading, which later led me into my favorite book. But that one was probably middle elementary school, and I just loved it. I read the entire series actually, and I feel like most people know Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but the rest of the series they haven't read. And honestly, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is more memorable to me. It's been a while since I've read them, so when I do get them, I'm probably going to reread them. But I loved it, you know, Aslan and the Pevensey siblings, and seeing how they work together and their relationship, but also the relationships that they build. And then later on they're older and, you know, navigating that as well. You know, just because of the time, the period that they're in, it is a little bit more intense. And yeah, it was definitely more of an intense book than I had read previously, because, you know, while Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, in my opinion, is a little bit darker than I thought it would be, it's still a children's book, and it's still, you know, lighter hearted, at least when I was reading it at that age. We will see. And so that kind of led me into reading a lot more fantasy books. But Chronicles of Narnia kind of stands on its own. It's just so unique, especially for the time. It's just this almost rite of passage. I feel like most people that are watching this probably have read Chronicles of Narnia, but if you haven't, then I highly recommend it. I also highly recommend the series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. Read the first book, The Bad Beginning, and I loved it. I love the whole series actually. I always tend to love the first book in a series just because of all of, like, the world building and getting to know the characters. I can honestly say that I really loved every book. You can't really, I don't want to give it away, but they're just different characters in each one that are so unique and whimsical. The author is just super creative about building these different environments that these children in. I think I really liked this series and also the Chronicles of Narnia, mostly just because of the siblings. My parents were divorced, so at the time we were going back and forth between houses every week. And so I think just my constant was my sister, and so like having a really good sibling relationship was important to me. And so when I read books with them, I thought it was really wonderful, and I could just relate a lot to it. The fact that the older sister in this, Violet, she really takes protecting them and guiding them in like as something very important to her, and so I just really resonated with that. Their parents died in a fire, but they're going to live with a distant family member, and they all have unique abilities in what they can do, but they live a life of misery and woe. But I just thought it was really clever. Violet is very smart, and I think it was just something that was really like formative for me. The next books that I read, which are some of my favorite books, and I've talked about them before, at least a couple of them. And these are my Barnes & Noble special editions. I just could not resist because they're just so pretty. But it's Heidi by Joanna Spyri, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodges Burnett, and Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. They're just adorable covers. I just really love them. These three just are something special for me. I remember reading Heidi when I was very young in these illustrated classics. I read a lot of these. I have 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and this one as well. They were something that my library had an abundance of, and they were really simplified versions of the story. They were a lot easier to read, big writing. My eyesight was bad even then, so. But I remember reading Heidi when I was really young. I loved that she was in the mountains, and the relationships that she develops as well. And that's kind of consistent throughout all of the books that I read. The Secret Garden is just something magical. It's hard for me to review these books or talk about why they meant so much for me, just because I don't want to spoil things for people that haven't read these, because I just think they're really great books to read. While I have read classics like Emma, Pride and Prejudice, they're not really like favorite books of mine. The Secret Garden is, and I think I might reread it soon. I'm reading Moon Garden, which is a modern version of it. It takes place in space. I loved, again, kind of going into a magical world and finding it, and there's just so many lessons that you learned in these. Anne of Green Gables, she's just plucky and, you know, spunky, and I, again, loved how she developed. They were just really great, especially for a young girl to read. I think that they are good for anyone to read, but for a young girl, they taught a lot me about myself and growing up and how to, you know, deal with adversity and challenges. And I think it made me a bit stronger, and I just really loved these ones. And these were probably some of the only classics that I really loved, besides like Peter Pan and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which I still love. I have these ones, as I said, and I got these ones. So I hope my children like to read these ones, because I think they're just special. I don't really know how to explain it, they're just special. So the next two books that had a really big impact on me were The Island of Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell, and I'll talk about the second one in a bit. But that book was actually required reading at my school, and I'm glad that they required it, because it's probably not something that I would have picked up. It's just something that I remember very vividly. I remember reading it probably in 5th or 6th grade. But if you've not read that book, it is about a young girl who ends up on an island alone, and she has to learn how to survive. That's a very simplified version, like a very simplified description of what happens. But how she survives and the courage it takes. She loses her brother while she's there. She has to contend with just lack of food, storms, you know, it's just the survival aspect and what it takes to mentally handle a situation like that, losing family, being on her own, the isolation of it. I think when I was younger, just kind of going through like changing times, it was very impactful for me. I think that even if it's not required reading for my sons when they go to school, I'm definitely going to have them read it, just because of what I learned from it. It's about independence and thriving even when you're alone or you face challenges, and it's not about, you know, failing, but it's about if you don't succeed now, you can still try again, do something different, and you can get even better and you can make it out of these situations. So I just think it's really great for kids to learn, and even adults. I still want a copy of that, and I think I want to reread it, because I sometimes think that we need to be reminded of that. Like these lessons that you learn in children's books, I think sometimes life, when you're being an adult, you lose it a little bit. You lose sight of it just with all of the other things that you need to do. And so I don't know, that might be why the reason why I like younger books. Just you simplify things down to these messages that you can, you know, absorb and learn, that were meant to teach children that are you know, in this innocent time in life. And I think sometimes it's good to get back to that. I don't want to get too crazy and deep here, but I think that's what stuck with me from that book. And it has been such a long time since I've read that book. The fact that it's still pretty vivid in my mind, what she went through and what she, you know, accomplished, that, you know, I think it's a really great book for everyone to read. So the next book that I have is another book that was required reading, but one that I am so glad that they required because I loved it. And that's Holes by Louis, I think Sachar is how you pronounce their name. And that one was later turned into a movie, which I also loved. But I read Holes as part of my assigned reading, and I just, that book really stuck with me. And not just because of the movie, but because he was sent to this like camp, and it was at the time where I was old enough to go to like away camps. And I think I was going around then, and it like really stressed me out, because if you don't know the main character, he gets into trouble even though it's not really his fault. and he has to get sent to basically this juvenile work camp where they make them dig holes. And there's a reason for it, but the camp is like really dangerous. There's these crazy lizards that can kill you, and it's really hot, and they only get certain amounts of water. But they live in this camp, and I just loved when he got there, figuring it all out, but also like making friends through it and just dealing with the adversity of the situation they are in. And there was a mystery that was going on, so it really kind of spoke to me when I still had like a love of like mysteries and figuring things out. And yeah, that book was just very formative. And then the movie came out, and I remember a lot of my friends and classmates went to see the movie, and then we spent time comparing the book to the movie, and it was just a really fun time in my life. So I think I associate that book with fun and just like a lot of like core memories. But I think it's a really wonderful book, and I plan on having it and having my kids read it as well. So my second to last book is one that to this day still makes me cry, so I avoid reading it too often, and it is Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls. My dad had me read this and I was very young. I was struggling at the time with some friends, and it's just school age kind of things where you're just not getting along with somebody. It is a very intense book. It will make you cry for sure if you've never read the book. This one, I don't know if you could say it sparked more of a love of reading, but it definitely showed me what you can learn from books. And this book, I think the main themes are friendship and what true loyalty is. And I think a lot of people can learn from this book. It's about a little boy and his 2 dogs, and the adventures that they have, and it's a lot, but it is so wonderfully written. And I have never met anybody that wouldn't give that book 5 stars, and that didn't say if they actually read it that they loved it, even though it made them cry. I can remember it vividly. It kind of makes me tear up when I think about it, but I think it was a really great book for my dad to have me read, just because I think I learned so much from it. And it definitely did change how I viewed friendships and what a true friendship is, and what loyalty in any relationship is, let alone friendship, but just any relationship that you have. So it was one of the books that I think taught me the most, and just showed me how much you can actually learn from books. I don't know if that's the experience of a lot of people, but again, I've never met anybody that said that book wasn't 5 stars for them. The next one is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. So this one I actually read in college. I can't believe that I hadn't read it before, but as I said, schools I went to didn't really do a lot of fantasy and sci-fi book reading. They have their required reading. Definitely liked some of them, obviously, but this one was something that I had never been suggested, and I really think it should. Ender's Game is just a brilliant book, even if you don't like sci-fi, about Ender, who's the 3rd child on our planet that had been attacked by Formics previously, an alien race. And you're only allowed to have 2 children, but they give permission for a 3rd if they think they're going to be smart enough to go to battle school. And that is a school that orbits the planet where they teach these children basically to become commanders in the war against the Formics. And these children are all brilliant. They're geniuses. But Ender is something else entirely. Him going there, he is so young, but he's going there and he's so smart. And so the internal dialogue that he has in this book is just insane. This is why I don't think that this book can be adapted, and I don't know if Murderbot, which is one of my other favorite sci-fi series, can also be adapted, just because the internal dialogue is just the entirety of the book, basically. How he thinks is what makes this book so fascinating and intriguing, like how he works through issues. But I also loved this book because of the friendships that he made, despite the fact that they're in this insanely high pressure situation. He still is able to make friends and work things out. And there's definitely a lot of challenge in this, just by the nature of what they're there to do. I think in high school I stopped reading as much, and then towards the end of college when I read this book, this is what really got me back to reading for a while. So this always holds like really special place in my heart, but it also really got me into more sci-fi books. Although it's not like my primary genre, I still really enjoy them. And so I really love this book, and I think that a lot of people would, and they probably should read it. I have read the rest of the series, but I love Ender's Game the most. And the last book that I've talked about at length and I always love is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is by far my most loved book, and the book that has just captured my imagination for the entirety of my life since I read it. My librarian suggested it, and ever since then, this has been like by far what has made me love fantasy and just the entire Tolkien world in general. I have an entire shelf devoted to it, and I fully intend on collecting every volume. But I love The Hobbit. The Hobbit is something that everyone, I think, should read. I just loved the adventure, the quest, the Hobbit being just this little person in this huge world, but just trying to go on this adventure and then do what's right for his friends and his family, and, you know, going to fight smog, and, you know, all of the world building between the dwarves and the elves. It's just perfect. This was something that sparked me getting into books that were a lot more challenging for me, but it really helped with my comprehension and my reading skills. This definitely was just this gateway to a lot more challenging books that I read right after this. This was pivotal in my reading for sure. So those are all the books. There's tons of other books that I read and really loved, but I feel like these ones are the ones that I could really point to and just really come to mind right away when I think about how I became the reader that I am, and also just ones that I'm hoping that my children will like to read as well. I will have them on hand in the hopes that they do. So if you have books that were really great for you growing up, please put them down in the comments. I always love to hear what people say, and I've gotten absolutely great recommendations from you all so far. So I hope you liked this video. I don't know if people watched to the end, but I appreciate it if you did. If you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, do all the things. I'm a new channel, so it would help me out. But as always, thank you again for being here, and I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time. Bye.